Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and here we ready? Welcome to week 7. This is the last week of the channeling series. Just want to remind everyone that next week we are taking a break. I'll be away, and then after that, on the 27th, that's in 2 weeks' time, we'll just do a quick 2-week series called "The Lion, the Leopard, the Eagle, and the Deer: How to Wake Up in the Morning." What does that mean? You have to come and find out. So, just a little review from last week. Last week we touched on a general channeling idea, which had to do with the book of Ruth. And we talked about the leadership of King David being a combination of his great humility and submission and surrender to that which was higher than him, but at the same time the strength, the positive strength that leadership requires, which was channeled from his great-grandmother Ruth, which was from the nation of the Moabites, which were a symbol of arrogance. And yet Boaz, the one that married Ruth, had managed to incorporate Ruth in the equation by channeling in a positive way the arrogance of Moab into a strength, a positive strength. Sorry. That was required for the concept of leadership. So that created a combination of strength and humility, which is an important combination, one that's needed for leadership, one that's needed for all of us really, in our own personal context of leadership. Then last week we began to focus on a general critical concept to do with channeling in general, and that is the idea of having two mindsets or two truths at the same time. And we said that that's a difficult thing to do, but yet critical in the whole process of personal growth in general, and particularly in the concept of channeling negative emotions into the positive expression, because often what happens is, the way to do that is to combine the right dose of that negative emotion in the right context, but together with another emotion. And the way we do that is only by asking ourselves the question, is it me or is it the pursuit of the truth? Meaning, am I responding as an emotion? Am I responding as a broadcast of what I'm feeling? Just me? Am I just projecting me? Or am I trying to find the right response, the truthful response, the moral response, the one that's going to be the most effective, the one that's going to accomplish what I needed to accomplish, right? So in that context, we talked about the idea of hate, that hate has its place. Oh, that's the wrong one. Right, hate has its place, but because we have to have an intolerance for evil and a hate for something that's bad and so on. But yet, we talked about a couple of things. Number one, we have to hate the evil, but not become a hating person. There's a big difference in hating something that we need to hate, but not becoming something that is actually, not becoming someone that's a hating person. And the second thing is, the most important thing is the concept of combining hate with love, which is a difficult thing to do. To actually hate and love at the same time. So I can hate the bad in someone or in something, and yet love it at the same time. And we talked about the concept, the symbolism based on the mitzvah in the Torah to help an enemy unload or offload a donkey, right? And specifically the Torah makes mention that if you're going in the street and there's 2 donkeys and 2 people, one of them belongs to your enemy, one of your friend, you have to help your enemy out. And the enemy in that context was not an enemy that I'm just having a conflict with someone, but it was more a spiritual enemy, someone that the Torah or morally I need to dislike something within them because it's bad and it's not a good role model and it's not something I want around my family and so on and so forth, and yet at the same time I need to exhibit love to that person, to show and to train myself that I'm disliking the bad but I'm not disliking the person, which means I am using hate but I'm not becoming a hating person. Both go together, right? So that concept. And these combinations are difficult because often emotions, we'll talk about this a bit more towards the end, emotions are something that go in extremes, right? And it's difficult to combine two emotions or sometimes two opposite emotions together. It's interesting, just yesterday I was speaking at that, what they call Yom Kesher at Moriah, and I was doing a thing for staff there. And we're talking about concepts to do with self-worth and self-esteem and managing stress in a positive way and so on. And someone asked a question. It was an interesting question because it resonated with me very much, because I could identify with her because I'm very much the same, about punctuality. And she said that I didn't mean you, it's okay.
It's okay.
What timing, my gosh. So the question went something like this, and this is a person who's very, very punctual, a teacher, a person who's very, very punctual, and stresses when she's late for a class, correctly so, to a degree, because she sees it as a value, and punctuality often is a value, especially when other people are depending on you, so she has a responsibility to be in a particular environment, as a leader of that environment, or whatever the case is. So she feels very, very stressed in coming late to a class, but often it's not in her control, because often what happens is she's finishing a class and waiting for another teacher to take over, and that teacher was late, perhaps that teacher was late because of someone else, could be a snowball effect and so on. So she completely stresses out and was sort of seeking a bit of insight into that, because we were talking about how to manage stress and the perspective and so on and so forth. So I guess this concept was on my mind about the two extremes, so I said to her the following, right, and this is very difficult. So I said, first of all, it resonated with me because I'm a bit like that too. I stress also with I used to stress more. I stress less these days. A little bit less, I should say. My wife still laughs at me for going 3 hours early to an airport. But you know, that's where it is. And I do see punctuality as a value. Sometimes probably a bit clouded because I think it's a personality in addition to being a value. So that's fine. And I said, in your particular case, there's no question that being very, very focused on being punctual to a classroom, for example, if you're a teacher, is definitely a value. It's a responsibility, it's a value, it's respecting other people's time, it's a duty of care, and so on and so forth, right? But the question is, when you emotionally respond to being late, which was out of your control, and you stress, now stress is also an emotion. When you start to stress and you start to tense up, what are you actually accomplishing with it? In other words, what is the stress component actually contributing to being on time now or to not being late tomorrow, right? And I said that there's three kinds of people. There's people who stress out when things happen, and then there's people that don't care, right? And both are doing the same thing. Both are doing it to an extreme. In other words, both can't handle being late or can't handle a particular event or a particular experience. It's either going to stress out or they just make up in their mind that just couldn't care less, right? I said, really, as human, both are wrong. Really, as human beings, what we need to try and do is to separate it out and to try and compartmentalize and actually care enough but not stress. In other words, the care or the concern or the determination to be on time is 100% legitimate. The stress isn't, right? So, in fact, not only the stress isn't, but the stress is just part of your own frustration. In other words, what are you really focused on? Are you really focused on what you're feeling, or are you focused on what's going to be beneficial for the outcome? Right? Same sort of idea. In other words, if you focus just on what you are feeling, so you want to be on time, you're not on time, so you're stressing out. When you're stressed out, you're not going to be on time anyways. Not only are you not going to be on time, you're not going to have the headspace to think creatively and think calmly about solutions you can put into place about being on time tomorrow. All you're doing is stressing. Stressing, all you're doing is just exhibiting yourself. You're just frustrating, right? So in fact, what you're doing is, you're not helping the situation. On the contrary, you're actually detracting from the situation because you're not going to be able to fix it in the future because you're just stressing out. Stressing out is paralyzing, right? So I say, therefore, if you are a person who's very, very focused on being on time, which is good, right? But then what you do is you see you late, you keep calm, you stay focused, you say, what is it that I need to do for the benefit of what I'm trying to achieve? So if you're very truthful about that, then what you would do is you would say, look, I'm late today, there's nothing I can do about it. In fact, it was out of my control. It's not because I'm a bad person. I wasn't irresponsible. I'm a responsible individual. I would like to be on time. It was out of my control. Therefore, I'm not going to stress out about it. I'm not happy about it because I really want to be on time. What I'm going to do is sit down afterwards and think calmly about creative solutions that we can make sure that things are in place, that I'm not on time, that I'm not late the next time. But what that requires is it requires a complete shift. So it's not exactly the same thing we're talking about, but it's the same sort of idea. It requires a complete shift away from what I'm feeling to what is needed. Now, doesn't mean what I'm feeling is bad, but it means I need to control what I'm feeling and be able to combine it with other things. Right? And that's very, very hard, but yet critical to growth in general. It does require removal of ego, even at a subtle level. When I say ego, I don't mean egocentricity or arrogance, I mean just the feeling of self. In other words, it does require a shift away from self, a shift away from what I am feeling or my feelings or my expression to what is the legitimate part of what I'm feeling, together with other stuff that is hard for me to combine, but the combination of which will create a much better and much more effective outcome. I don't know if that's clear, but that's just sort of the same sort of a similar sort of idea, which goes into a whole nother concept of guilt. We've talked about this before, but just in the context of this discussion, right? I was going to talk about it last week, we ran out of time. But guilt is an interesting emotion. So also worth exploring the idea of channeling guilt. So we know that guilt is a very bad emotion, a very unhealthy emotion. It's paralyzing, it stands in the way of growth. It's often just an escape. In other words, I don't know what to do about what I've done, so I'm just going to feel guilty, and then it makes me feel better. Often that's the case. And normally excessive guilt plagues a person to the point where they just feel guilty, they feel bad about themselves, but they don't actually do anything about what they're guilty about, right? So therefore guilt often is something frowned upon, and something which is talked about that one should try and work not to walk around ridden with guilt. On the other hand, guilt is a critical emotion, because without guilt, without the response of guilt, we would never grow, right? Because it's essentially what guilt is an extreme, not an extreme or intense, a strong feeling of discomfort with what I've done. Guilt at a healthy level, in fact, is the best form of taking responsibility. So if I offend someone, if I hurt someone, if I speak unkindly to someone, if I did something to someone, if I harmed someone, if I criticize someone in the wrong way, if I gossip about someone, whatever the case is, and then I feel bad about it, that's okay, it's good. Because if I wouldn't feel bad about it, if I don't feel uncomfortable with what I've done, I will never be able to grow, I'll never be able to fix it. In other words, the absence of guilt is not an option either, because the absence of guilt equals complacency, and complacency is very, very bad for a person, right? And we know this from the Rambam Maimonides. We've talked about this before, when he talks about the idea of tshuva, of repentance, and he talks about the stages of repentance, right? So the first stage we know is cheshbon, it's actually to be aware of what I've done. Awareness is always step number one, because without awareness we don't even know there's a problem. Step two is charata, as the Rambam calls it, which is charata means regret. We need to regret what we've done in order to fix it, right? If I feel totally comfortable with where I am today, I will not be better tomorrow. It's a very simple equation, right? And therefore, some level of guilt, some level of intense discomfort of where I am, and it has to be a strong discomfort, because if I don't have a strong discomfort, I don't have the resolve to change. Why? Because change is hard. Growth is hard. Improving is hard. All these things are very hard. And when we do change, or we do take the next step, or we do fix a reaction, or we fix a relationship, or we fix something that we've done wrong, it requires a lot of effort. And that effort normally is based on a resolve, a strong resolve, right? Because without resolve, we don't change. And that strong resolve is based on an intense level of discomfort, which is good guilt, healthy guilt, right? So therefore, what's the story? How do we channel guilt from the negative into the positive? So there's two things that are really, really important. The first thing is something we've talked about many, many times, which is true with everything in life, is asking ourselves the question, who controls who? Is the guilt controlling me, or am I controlling the guilt? Right? In other words, Am I using guilt, or am I a guilty person? To use the terminology that we've been talking about last week and this week. In other words, if I'm guilty about something, has it overcome me? Has it become who I am? So am I walking around the whole day with guilt, not able to banish the thoughts of guilt when I need to, when it's constructive to do so? Am I just ridden with guilt, and therefore the guilt thoughts and the guilt emotion, the guilt feeling is just overriding me and obsessing me and controlling me? Or am I in control of the guilt? In other words, am I using the guilt at a designated time, at a particular time, in a particular way, to build up a feeling of discomfort, and then making a resolve, and then moving on to be able to improve, right? And this is something that we know the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, talks about, and he says that in order to feel bad about something, one actually has to have designated times to do that. We have to have designated times to feel guilty, right? What does he mean by that? He says, yeah, because that means you're in control of guilt. So designated times to feel guilty means that you have to have time, and in the context of his discussion there, he talks about before you go to bed at night, when you reflect on the day, or we have Yom Kippur for that, or we have Erev Rosh Chodesh once a month, whatever the case is, where we actually designate times to reflect, to make a cheshbon. He encourages the concept of daily reflection, and weekly reflection, and monthly reflection, and yearly reflection, just to be aware of what we've done, because the truth is, reflection is the same thing. To continuously self-question and reflect on what I've done and what I haven't done is also not healthy, because we have to get on with the job, right? We have to go through a day functioning and producing and achieving and having relationships and giving and helping and so on. Therefore, to continuously reflect on what I've been doing is not a good thing either. We have to have designated times to do that, where we stop and say, okay, let me just review the day, let me review the week, let me review the month. I go on and I highlight the strengths, I highlight the good things that have happened, then I highlight the weaknesses, and I highlight the mistakes that I've made, and I highlight them to a point where I feel intensely uncomfortable with them, and I make a resolve to improve them. I learn what is it that I did wrong, what can I do better, and I come to a conclusion and I make a resolution, right? And then I move on, and then I start feeling guilty. I tell guilt is like a guest that can't overstay its welcome, right? It needs to move on after a while. But that's a difficult thing to do in itself. But that all that means is that I'm in control of the guilt, and the guilt isn't in control of me. So that's one concept to do with guilt. The other concept he talks about there is based on Kabbalistic writings, based on the Zohar, I think, where again the same idea, where he says that a person has the capacity, because guilt comes with a certain level of sadness. Not when I say sadness, I don't mean despair. I mean discomfort, right? Which is not normally the word that we'd associate it with joy, right? The imagery of intense discomfort is not normally juxtaposed with the concept of joy. Yet the Zohar says that a person has the capacity, and the imagery the Zohar uses is the two sides of the heart, because heart is considered the seat of emotion. So the two sides of the heart, which is to feel that intense discomfort in one side of the heart, and yet feel intense joy on the other side of the heart. To have joy and discomfort at the same time. And that's very hard. But yet very necessary. Now what's the joy coming from? You see, joy, happiness, inner happiness, is also critical for personal growth. Why? Because positive thinking, inner happiness, sense of meaning and purpose is the only way that gets me moving. Because that we have a saying from the Talmudic sages that simcha poretz geder, which means joy breaks boundaries. For me to really say that I can change, for me to say that I can go out of who I am at the moment, for me to say that I can go out of my comfort zone, for me to say that I can change something that I thought until now was intrinsically part of my personality, means I've got to have a very strong confidence. That confidence comes almost with a happiness. It's a positive outlook. It's yes, I can do it. I know I can do it. I've got infinite potential. Like I've been stuck till now, but I can move on, right? So it kind of requires that confidence, that positive thinking, that amazing optimism to be able to say, no, I'm going to do it. I can do it. I can jump over the hurdles. I can overcome the obstacles, right? A person who's sad, a person who's in despair, a person who's in discomfort, is drawn down, retreats, it's the completely opposite mindset that doesn't allow a person to move forward and to be ambitious and to overcome obstacles and so on. So therefore we have two things that will propel a person into growth. One is the feeling of the discomfort of where I am now, and yet it's the joy and the confidence and the positivity of where I could be tomorrow. And therefore we have to have those things at the same time. right? He talks about the joy that we have, that God believes in us. Something we've talked about many times about the last expression of Modeh, right? That God believes in us, that God gives us the opportunity, that God is forgiving, right? We say in the Amidah, there's an expression that we say in the Amidah every day, during the weekday Amidah, where we ask God for forgiveness, and we end off the blessing and we say, Baruch Atah Hashem Chanun Hamarbeh Lisloach, that we call God the merciful God who abundantly forgives. What does it mean, abundantly forgives? What's that expression, abundantly forgives? It means abundantly forgives means that He forgives again and again and again, that we could mess up 20 times, for 20 years, for 40 years, and He never gives up on us. He says, no problem, I'm willing to let it go, and you can just keep trying. His analogy is different to a king of flesh and blood, who if you keep angering him, he'll eventually give up on you and say, that's it, I'm done. Right? God's never done with us. So that joy, knowing that, for example, joy knowing the unconditional love that God has for us, the unconditional trust that God has in us, to be able to always move, to always change, to always move forward, brings amazing joy. Yet you also have to have the discomfort of not being comfortable where you are now, and that which is the healthy guilt, and the healthy guilt works together with the joy for the future. And therefore he talks about that guilt and simcha, that guilt and that joy coexisting at the same time. That's a very difficult thing to do, but yet very powerful. Again, it comes from the concept of it's not about me. It's about what's going to bring the best outcome, what's going to bring the best state of valuable living. How am I going to achieve the purpose of making my life meaningful and purposeful in the best way? If it's all about me, then I'm feeling guilty, or I'm feeling optimistic, or I'm feeling that there's no problem in the world. But if it's not about me, in other words, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable, but I know that at the same time, there's great room for joy because God still trusts me. I'm not a bad person. He still trusts me. He still invests in me. He's still not giving up on me, so that I can have that guilt and that joy at the same time. So again, the same idea. The channeling often comes from the word that we talked about in the very first time, the concept of hitkalalut. Hitkalalut is that integration between the different emotions, the integration between chesed and gvura, between different opposite things, which you have to try and move towards. And with guilt, it's the same thing. So with hate, it's the same thing. Good hate, healthy hate can only be healthy if it comes together with love. Guilt is the same thing, and can only be healthy guilt if it comes, first of all, if it's controlled, and second of all, if it comes together with joy at the same time. Guilt and joy at the same time, coexisting, and then we can have the healthy channeling of the concept of healthy guilt. By the way, this just two thoughts. First of all, this concept of who controls me is true with lots of things. This is the whole answer to technology today, right? People often ask me, is technology a good thing or a bad thing in the Jewish perspective? I say, well, if something is created by God, it's got to be good, right? However, we know that it's done a lot of harm, and there's a lot to talk about, and it's a very, very interesting discussion in its own right. However, one of the key answers to know if your iPhone or iPad or any technology they use is good or bad is to answer one simple question. Who controls who? Does it control me or do I control it? Very simple, right? If I control it, the chances are it could be a tool for absolute goodness, amazing goodness. Communication with people who it's hard to keep in touch with, information that you weren't able to access, which is now much easier. Efficiency, so much stuff, so much good can come out of technology. If it controls you, almost inevitably it'll be a destructive tool. Destroy relationships, be addictive, and so on and so forth. So that concept, that simple but profound question of who controls who is an amazing question to ask ourselves about lots of things. And often the difference between something being good and bad is who controls what. So it's just something to bear in mind. The other thing we talked about, simcha, about joy. So in Hebrew, the word for sameach, the word for happiness, to be happy, sameach, is very close to the word sameach, which is to grow. Tzmicha. Tzmicha and simcha are very similar letters except for one. And the commentaries talk about this relationship between joy and growth, that real growth comes from being confident, having that positive outlook, and being that sort of joyous mindset. So I want to just talk about another channeling emotion, because we're wrapping up today a little bit, and a little bit the same sort of idea. One of the most difficult things to do is to judge people favorably. Right? The default reaction of most human beings is to judge people negatively. Right? We see something that looks negative, especially if it affects us, we jump to a negative conclusion. Why that is a separate story, but that's what a lot of people do automatically, right? So we have the famous saying in the Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Fathers, Heve dan et kol ha'adam lekaf zchut, judge every human being favorably. Now, what does that mean, to judge a person favorably? So, sometimes what it means is you don't know the context, you don't know the background, you don't know the whole picture, you don't know what's behind it, you don't know the circumstances, right? So therefore I see something, I see someone doing something wrong, maybe it wasn't wrong. I see someone being obnoxious, cutting off someone in traffic, maybe they didn't realize, maybe, whatever the case is, right? So we know that there's a very big problem, because on the one hand, and we've talked about this before, but I want to just bring it into this concept of sort of channeling. So judgmentalism generally is a negative thing. It's viewed as a negative concept, to be judgmental, right? People don't like to be judged. We shouldn't judge others. It's unhealthy. It's negative for us as well. So generally speaking, not to be a judgmental person is a good thing. To be accepting of others, frame things in a positive way, is much more positive, much more beneficial. However, judgmentalism has a place. And it's critical sometimes. So we have this problem. Why? On the one hand, it says we should judge everyone favorably. In fact, I think I've shared this with you before. The Talmud says, and the Baal Shem Tov takes us to a very extreme level and explains it in the following way, that we have a concept that when you see a blemish, when you see something wrong with someone else, it's normally a reflection of ourselves. It's like a mirror, right? So the Baal Shem Tov talks about this mirror concept, where if I look at someone else and I see something bad, very often what I'm doing is I'm just looking in the mirror, right? I'm looking in the mirror, I'm highlighting something which is bothering me. Why am I highlighting something which bothers me, which actually is a reason why we judge negatively often, because really it's unresolved stuff within ourselves, and we're really looking at something which is so bothering me, but really it's within us. Just within us, we have this concept that self-love just covers up and conceals all self-faults, and therefore, when we see it with someone else, it kind of bothers us, right? Very beautiful idea. However, it can't always be true. Because we all have what we call a circle of influence, right? So to use a very simplistic example, if someone has a young child, and the young child is behaving badly, right? So what are you going to do? Have rose-colored glasses and just judge favorably? No, he didn't really steal, He didn't really take the other kid's lunch in school. Didn't mean to, he thought it was his lunch. No, you don't do that. You judge. You bring your kid home, you sit him down and say, listen, stealing is a bad thing, right? Don't you ever steal again, or whatever the case is, right? However we do it. Or if a kid does something that's dangerous, right? Kid runs into the street. You don't judge favorably. You very, very strongly see bad for what it is. It was bad, it was a naughty thing to do, and don't do it again. Very simply, right? Okay, that's a very simplistic example, but the truth is, by extension, we all have a circle of influence, not only children. We all have people that are under our influence, people that we have a responsibility to teach, to inspire, to instruct, right? People who our responsibility is to try help them improve. To do that, we've got to see bad for what it is. Now, obviously, there's always some level of non-judgmentalism. So even if I see something really bad with a child or with someone else or with a friend or someone that's in my circle of influence, there's always that judging favorably where I say, okay, you have to understand where it comes from. They had a bad upbringing. They didn't mean to be bad. But the bottom line is what they're doing is bad. I need to try and help them to rectify it, right? Someone is in a bad relationship. Someone comes to me for relationship counseling, for example, and they're being obnoxious to their partner. I've got to be able to see that for what it is. Don't judge them favorably. I can judge them favorably in the background. I can say, look, that's, I understand the person had a bad upbringing, didn't have a good role models. And I can try to communicate to the person, I'm sure you don't mean to be an obnoxious person, but you are being obnoxious, bottom line, right? I mean, you can say it nicely, but the bottom line is, that's what it is. You've got to see bad for what it is. There's no point in beating around the bush. So obviously there's a place, right? There's a place for judgmentalism. So there is the explanation, I've shared this with you before, that actually this is, and by the way, the Torah tells us, there's a commandment in the Torah to reprimand someone if you think you can help them improve. Right? We spoke about this a few weeks ago. If we have an opportunity to help someone improve on something bad, it's actually not just something we could do, something we have to do. Right? If we see someone doing something that is wrong, intrinsically wrong, we have a responsibility to help that person improve. To do that, you have to see what they did as bad, right? So therefore, the simple answer and the simple explanation to all that is that it all depends who it is. And therefore, the commentaries explain that we have to divide the population of the world into two groups. People who are in our circle of influence and people who are outside of our circle of influence. Right? People who are outside of our circle of influence, we are just observers. Right? We don't have, they're not in our circle of influence. Therefore, it's not our business. And therefore, on the contrary, when we see people outside of our circle of influence, our effort that we put in is to be completely non-judgmental. Right? If you read about someone in the newspaper or someone you see in the street you don't even know doing something bad, why should we look at it bad? There's nothing wrong. On the contrary, it's good training for us to try and reframe. To say, well, maybe I didn't see it correctly. Maybe I didn't interpret it correctly. Maybe actually I don't even understand what's happening. Maybe it's not even bad altogether. That's very good for us, and it's a good training for us, and it helps us look at things in a positive way. And building up positive thinking is very healthy. Right? It's there where the Talmud tells us, or where the Baal Shem Tov sort of emphasizes this idea, that if I don't seem to be able to do that, and it seems to be really irritating me about something that I perceive to be bad, happening within someone completely strange and random, that I don't even have an influence over, then really I should view it as looking in the mirror, rather than seeing something bad in someone else's personality, right? However, that's only someone outside of a circle of influence. Someone that's in our circle of influence, it's different. We have to be able to be judgmental in a healthy way, in a positive way. We need to be able to see bad for what it is, and we need to be able to help the person improve in it, right? Interestingly enough, a lot of people actually switch it around, and that becomes the problem, right? We're very, very critical about everyone in the world, everyone in the planet, except for the people we're supposed to be helping, right? All of a sudden, I don't like confrontation, I don't want to get involved, I'm not sure, I don't think they'll listen anyway, right? Suddenly we're scared, we run. Why? Because I understand that. It's type of difficult. It's much easier to gossip and to judge and to criticize people I don't know than it is to actually confront people that someone that's close to me, and might be my own children or my own sibling or my own people that are in my circle of influence, and to actually confront it and have a difficult conversation and say, listen, I need to talk to you. Do it in a positive way, in the most beneficial and constructive way, and that becomes all of a sudden very, very difficult to do. It could be confronting, we're scared of failure. If I talk about someone in New York, there's no prospect of failure, because I'm always going to succeed in talking about it, right? But if I have to talk to someone that's close to me and someone that I might actually have an influence over, but I'm scared that I might not succeed, and then I'm going to look at myself as a failure, so therefore it becomes too difficult, so all of a sudden I don't like confrontation, and therefore I'm not going to do it, right? So we switch it around. Really should be the other way around. We should confront or be more judgmental of people who are in our circle of influence in a nice way, but yet people outside of our circle of influence, we need to train ourselves to look positively and to look at things in a much more positive light. But there's something deeper, and this goes to what we were talking about before. One of the reasons why I need to be judgmental, or I could be judgmental, I'm using the word judgmentally carefully, of course, in a positive way, with someone that's in my circle of influence, is also because of this. Because someone within my circle of influence, I can be judgmental and I can love at the same time. And I can show that love. And in fact, that healthy judgmentalism that I use to point out something that's negative to someone that's in my circle of influence, if I don't do it with a tremendous dose of love, I'm not going to succeed. It'll be negative. And that's very, very hard. Because sometimes one option is to ignore, that we can sometimes do even though it's hard. But if we don't ignore, we see something that's staring us in our face that's really bad, it's very hard to love the person at the same time. Those of you who had young kids will know this. Sometimes when your kid drives you mad, it's very, very hard to love that kid at that moment, right? When you perceive that sort of the child got up and their whole purpose in life was to ruin your day, right? especially if they're a teenager, right? Yes?
You said that sometimes we're obliged to tell the person if they're close to us.
Yeah, so there's a whole complicated section in Shulchan Aruch about it, actually. Because the Talmud also says, just like it's a mitzvah to say something that's going to be heard, it's also a mitzvah not to say something that won't be heard. Right? But yes, if someone is close to us and we see something that we think we can help them improve, we have an obligation to try. Now we've got to be very careful how we try, we've got to say it in the right way, and we've got to do it with tremendous love.
I'm wondering, what are the indicators that you should try? Like what topics, or is there a clear way to distinguish whether you should try or not?
So I think first of all, step one is to have a good sense of who's in our circle of influence and who isn't, right? Number one. Number two, and that varies from person to person, right? People are in more leadership positions, people are just individuals, but they have a close leadership sort of network, right? Also, it depends on how important the thing is, and it also depends how ready that person is, right? So sometimes you see a range of things with someone that's in your circle of influence, but there's a priority system. It's good if they change A before they change B, so you leave B alone, right? So there's, so I guess there's a lot of review and a lot of reflection that has to go on. But the approach has to be, I need to try and do something about this if I can, right? But it involves a certain level of judgmentalism. It involves me seeing bad for what it is. But it also involves, for it to be effective, it also involves me showing love at the same time. In other words, that the person should, because we will never be effective with any criticism or any judgmentalism that we give if the message isn't that I really care for the person, right? And there it goes back to the same concept I said before. What is it when I'm being judgmental? Is it me just being irritated, in which case the person is not going to receive it from me? Or am I actually after the value? Am I after really helping the person? Is that my goal? Is the goal to let up my frustration, or is the goal to actually help the individual? If the goal is to help the individual, I have to develop a capacity to really love that person at the same time when I identified it could be something really bad within the person. But I love them at the same time. Otherwise, if I can't combine that, then I can't. Then I won't be effective. Now, there's another instance where I can't do that, but I still have to highlight love, and that's to protect myself. That's another discussion. That's an extreme cases. Sometimes I have to be able to see bad for what it is in order to protect myself. I might not be able to reprimand the person. I might not be able to help the person, but I need to be able to create boundaries for myself, and that's another discussion. But I'm talking about in a normal sort of ongoing day-to-day relationship idea, right? And that's why, we have that thing, and I've shared it with you 100 times, but I'll do it again anyway, because it's just a beautiful idea. I heard this from my grandfather in the name of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, that he said how a person must give criticism, right? And it's exactly that concept. And I'm sure you've heard from him many times, just in case those of you haven't. So he said that in the old shtetl, he used to give the analogy that there was bathhouses, and the bathhouses used to have schwitzbads, which was saunas, right? And the saunas had a practice where they had you go upstairs and heat rises and smoke and there was fire, and you went to the top and it was really, really, that's where you really schwitz, and it was very good, right? And on the top there was a guy called a bedder. A bedder was a person who had like a broom with bristles on it, and he would give you a good zetz on the back. It was like some sort of massage, and it was apparently very geschmack, as they say. And you get this good zetz as you were schwitzing, and you say, that's gewaldig, can you give me another one, right? So he asked the question, he said, imagine that you walked in the street, and the same guy came up to you with the same broom and he gave you a zetz on the back. What would you do? You'd probably turn around and give it to him back. I mean, like, what kind of chutzpah is that? He says, what's the difference? He says, right? He said, the difference is that when the guy gave you a whack on the back on top of the sauna, he did two things first. He warmed you up and he lifted you up. When you warm someone up and you lift someone up and then you give them a zetz on the back, they ask for more. Right? Same idea. So this is really the concept we're talking about here. Sometimes when you need to criticize, or when you need to judge, or we need to highlight something that's not good with someone else, that might be completely legitimate, right? Because it's in your circle of influence, it's your responsibility, it becomes a value then to see bad for what it is and to help the person. It only helps when it comes together with love. If we have the capacity to warm the person up and to lift them up and then to point it out, it might be painful, but it's very good. It's a good feeling, and they ask for more, hopefully, right? And that's again the combination. This idea of itkalalut, this idea of combination is such an important thing. It's probably one of the most difficult things to achieve, and yet one of the most critical things in the journey of self-growth and personal growth. Be able to hold two truths, hold two emotions, hold two ideas at the same time, because shifting the focus away from what I'm feeling to what is the truth, what is the value, what is the purpose, what is the outcome that I'm looking for, and what I'm trying to achieve in the most moral and valuable way. So I just want to end off with an idea, just to wrap it all up. We talked about channeling. Right? There's a Kabbalistic idea that our emotions, what we've been talking about the last number of weeks, we have emotions in our heart and thinking in our brain, right? So we know we've got the 10 powers of the soul. 3 are intellectual, 7 are emotional. The seat of intellect is in the brain, the seat of emotion is in the heart. So in Kabbalah we have this description, this terminology, that intellect is called the parents and emotion is called the children. right? So just for example, the two primary intellectual forces are called Chokhmah and Bina, as we've talked about many times. Chokhmah and Bina is often referred to in Kabbalah as Av Va'em, the mother and the father, right? What that means, just briefly, is that just like in a physical union, and a mother and father give birth to a child, the father's contribution is the foundational seed, whereas the mother's process is taking that seed and then processing it and developing it and nurturing it until it becomes a human being. So too, in the way we develop an intellectual idea, we have the kernel of truth, the idea, the spark, the concept, which is called Chokhmah. It's like the foundational truth of the idea, which is the kernel of the foundation of the concept we're trying to understand, which everything else is based on. And then that's Chokhmah, which is like the first creativity, the conception of an idea. And then we have Bina. The word Bina actually means binyan, to build, which is take that idea, nurture it, give it breadth and depth, analyze it, process it, test it, and create a complete binyan, a complete building, a complete intellectual edifice. Then we have the idea of dat, which is the connection between the two and the combination. What is the outcome? So the purpose of healthy intellect, the purpose of healthy thinking, is the idea of giving birth to healthy emotion, right? So we've talked about this before, that a healthy human being thinks first and then feels. In other words, really good emotions are emotions which are an outcome of the way we think. So when we think, we make decisions. When we think things through objectively. We build up an intellectual concept, and it's that intellect, that thinking, that then inspires the way we feel, hopefully, right? Now, we've talked about the problem doesn't always work. The transition from intellect to emotion is a very difficult one. We have the narrowness of the throat we've talked about before, and so on and so forth. But it's for that reason that the midot, our emotional responses, are called children. Because what they're supposed to be is, they're supposed to be an outcome of our thinking. Okay. But to take it a little bit deeper in the context of our discussion that we've been talking about the last number of weeks, there's another reason why emotions are called children. And just think of the analogy and the imagery of parents and young children, right? Young children sometimes are hard to manage. Why? Because they're all over the place. They work in extremes. They're immature, right? But there's something amazing about childishness, right? The purity, the innocence, and the passion, the excitement. So we said before that children are very emotional beings, right? They lack, why? Because they lack intellectual maturity. So therefore children are work in extremes, they love in extreme, they laugh in extreme, they joke in extremes, they're passionate, they're wild, they jump, they run, right? And so on and so forth. That's what emotions are. That's why emotions are children. Because emotions are like this childlike energy with all its advantages and disadvantages. What's the purpose? What's the responsibility of a parent? Responsibility of a parent is not to suppress, right? Sorry. Not to suppress the childishness in the child, but to channel it and direct it and mature it, right? One of the great mistakes in parenting often is that when we see bad responses that children have, we suppress them rather than challenge. Now, suppression is sometimes a necessary interim strategy, right? If one sibling is killing the other sibling, then we just need to stop it, right? No time for channeling, just cut it out. Okay, but I'm giving an extreme example, simple example. But nevertheless, sometimes obviously the negative expression of negative emotions need just to be stopped, right? But at the same time, I mean, it's just interesting. Just yesterday I was talking to a few people last night, and someone was telling me about a classmate they had that in school, like this was the naughtiest child in school, like just got up to all mischief and all trouble and everything. Like every time there was trouble, it was this kid, right? Up until like year 10 or year 11 or 12 even. And today this guy's like a leading oncologist somewhere, like an amazing doctor helping hundreds and thousands of people, right? Why? Because there's an amazing creativity in Wilde Chayes. You know what I'm saying? Like there's not so easy to take as parents, but right, there's an amazing creativity, there's amazing potential in sometimes what seems to be exhibited as really, really challenging stuff, right? So that's what midot are, that's what emotions are. Now the truth is that the personality of a person lives in emotion, doesn't live in the brain, lives in the heart. That's who we are. We are our emotions. That's why emotions are so important. That's where our passion is. That's where our excitement is. That's where our warmth is. That's where our conviction lies, right? It's all very passionate, all very emotional. The function of, and that's the child within us, right? So we have the child within us. That's our emotions. The greatest tragedy often is that when people grow up and they mature, that the maturity takes over to such a extent where the child doesn't get channeled or matured, the child dies. And the childlikeness just disappears. Right? There's this concept that we learn about connecting to the childishness within us, and we should never lose that. What we do need to learn is, as our intellect matures, is how to guide it. That's very, very different. And to harness the passion, and to channel the passion, and to channel the potential that lies within that childishness of emotion, and to bring it under the guidance of the parents, which is our thinking. So one of the greatest, not challenges, one of the greatest necessities that we have as mature adults, or people that mature or grow up, so to speak, is to use our mind, is to use our intellect. Using our intellect will help us make decisions. Using our intellect makes us understand what the values are, what the goals are. Intellect also is exactly the tool that allows us to have two emotions coexist. That's why children can't do that, because the intellect are not mature enough, right? So it is intellect that says, well, no, I need a dose of this and a dose of that. I can be guilty and happy at the same time. I can hate this, but I can love this at the same time, and I can separate. It all comes from the brain, right? So that's why the contribution of our thinking and our intellect is so critical. However, the role of the intellect, the role of the brain, the role of the parent within ourselves, which is our own thinking, the role of the parent part of our personality is to guide, not to suppress. That's why the concept of channeling emotion is such an important topic. And that's what I wanted to do the series about. That's why sometimes, even if we see ourselves, and that's an awareness. I mean, the first step to personal growth is awareness, to be aware of our strengths, to be aware of our own weaknesses, to be aware of the negativity of some of our emotions and how we express them in a destructive and a negative way. Absolutely, that is part one. Part two is to think about it and understand the negative part of it, which needs to be eliminated, and which we should work on it. We shouldn't get angry, we shouldn't be aggressive, and we shouldn't hate, and we shouldn't take revenge, and we shouldn't be jealous, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, as we're using our cognitive process to be able to make the right moral decisions, we also have to look at ourselves and say to ourselves, well, how can we use that properly? If we have a disposition for a particular emotional response, how are we channeling it? How are we using it in a good way? How are we using it in a positive way? How are we using it in a creative way? And that's really what makes a healthy person. A healthy person is when the emotions that God gave us are used and channeled and not eliminated and suppressed. Eliminated, yes, initially. That's why we spoke about in the very beginning, the matzah idea, where in the beginning of the cycle we have the matzah, which is completely self-negation, because we've got to get rid of anything that's connected with ego and just start with a clean slate. But then we need to reintroduce some of who we are and not eliminate it, but learn to do it based on humility and selflessness, not based on egocentricity, based on values, not self-interest, based on effectiveness and not just projection of self. And when we do that, then we are able to harness that's why it's called children. We are able to harness the child passion, child strength, which is in that emotion, and guided by the parent within us, which is the brain, to be able to live very, very effectively and to achieve good values and good morals. Yeah.
Is there an appropriate time or place to just let the children run wild?
No, look, everything's got to be, it depends. When they're about 6 months. No, look, I think that's a parenting question, but it's a good question, and I think it's how we. No, I don't mean we shouldn't.
Not that I was obviously talking about the emotions.
Yeah. No, so if it's being, well, it's also a parenting question. No, so I think the answer to that is that the negative expression of it is something we need to try and curb, right? So if we're getting angry and hurting other people, no, we need to try and stop that. But simultaneously, we need to try what's behind there, what's good in there that I can use. You know what I'm saying? Can I just, yeah.
Can I just to get back to what you said about love and hate? Because I had a personal incident with very good friends, and the one friend said something, she didn't want to say it, but she said something about the daughter that was a bit out of line, because she wasn't going to say it, and the friend said, well, if you've got something to say, say it. And it wasn't that nice, and she apologized to to her, I'm sorry, and then went home and we thought it was all settled, and then she phoned her and blew it out of all proportion. And now she won't forgive this friend for what she said. And so it's affected the relationship.
Yeah, no, sure. So look, just very briefly, because I want us to wrap up, but it's a long discussion, that, because it also depends when we say things and how we say things and what context and what it comes with or what it comes after. And then also goes to the whole thing of how we receive criticism and how we forgive and how we're able to forgive. So that's a long discussion. Yeah, which I'm happy to have sometime, but anyway, it's evolved. Before you go, can I just, two things. First of all, if I can just get your attention for a minute. First of all, just to remind everyone, again, just those who came in a little bit later, so just remind everyone that next week we're not on, we're taking a break, I'll be away. The week after we'll do a 2-week series, what I call it, the lion, the eagle, the leopard and the deer, how to wake up in the morning. Also, we've got another few weeks left to our raffle. We really still need to sell a lot of tickets. It's an important fundraiser for Bina. If I can ask you, just if I get your attention one moment, if you haven't bought tickets, please do. If you have, you can buy another one, that's even better. Also, if you can spread the word, if you can ask people maybe who haven't, and spread the word. We've got another few weeks left. We're going to draw it on the 7th of July. No, not 7th, it's the 5th of July. The last Thursday, anyway. The last Thursday we get together. We always